We have with us today Mr. Sunil David. He's the Regional Director of IoT. He works with AT&T. He's going to be talking about securing enterprise IoT to drive business values. So a little bit about Sunil. Sunil has 26 years of experience in the IT and Telecom industry and is currently the Regional Director of IoT for AT&T in India and is based in Chennai. He is responsible for building the IoT strategy for India and the Asia-Pacific ASEAN regions and working with various internal stakeholders to ensure successful execution and working on building a robust partner ecosystem for AT&T in the entire IoT value chain. Sunil has spoken at more than 50 industry forums in India and abroad, organized by leading industry bodies like COAI, CII, IAMAI, Cybermedia, NASSCOM, ASSOCHAM, and Geospatial. Sunil was recognized by the World Marketing Congress in November 2017 as one of the 50 most influential digital marketing leaders across India. With that, I want to hand the stage over to Sunil. Sunil, it's all yours.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
No, not yet. I can't see your screen.
Now?
Not yet, Sunil.
Now?
Yeah, now I can see it.
Should I put it in slideshow mode?
Yeah. So on the stage is all yours. Yeah, perfect. All yours.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. And firstly, I'm really sorry that we had this technical glitch. I had a challenge with my Firefox browser. It wasn't recognizing my audio and my webcam. So apologies for the delay. But firstly, I thank Rocheston for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts on a very, very pertinent topic, which is securing enterprise IoT to drive business value. I want to first start with sharing an incident which happened about 4 or 5 years back. Actually, this happened in 2015. There was one large fish tank in a casino in Las Vegas. And this fish tank had a temperature sensor which was regulating the temperature of the water inside that fish tank, because the temperature has to be at an optimal level inside that fish tank. And so they had an IoT-enabled temperature sensor that was inside. And because it was IoT-enabled, it was connected to the internet. And the owners of the casino were using the IoT-enabled solution to monitor the temperature in real time. And in case the temperature goes beyond a particular threshold, they could take corrective action and make sure that the temperature comes back to normalcy, because the fish obviously would have to survive there. And hence temperature has to be in an optimal range. Now, what happened was there was a hacker who actually managed to compromise that fish tank. So he was able to get into the internal network after he compromised that IoT device. And after he did that, he was actually able to download almost 10 GB of client data of that particular casino. So the point which I want to make is that the hackers don't even spare a fish tank, right? So even a fish tank can be compromised. So anything which is connected to the internet, anything which has an IP address, there's the potential for it to be hacked. And there are, I think, enough examples of how seemingly innocuous things have been hacked, including a toy. Now, having talked about this incident which happened 5 years back, let me quickly move to the agenda. As far as the agenda is concerned, I'm very quickly going to talk to you about how the digital transformation that we are seeing today, how is it impacting cyber risk, talk about what's the framework for securing IoT, because today IoT and cybersecurity in general is a boardroom discussion. Share with you some security trends in India and also some global security trends for this year. And then what are the solutions? Given the risk that we are seeing, what is the way forward? How do we address security? I'll hopefully leave 5 to 10 minutes for questions. Now, digital transformation, I don't need to explain what this is, but we are right now seeing a major acceleration of digital transformation initiatives. And various companies before COVID were at various stages of their digital transformation journey. Some are very early, some were fairly mature. But what COVID has done is it's separated the men from the boys, so to speak, because those who were fairly mature in their digital transformation journey have been less impacted because of COVID, and those who haven't even started and who are very early have been impacted significantly because of the COVID situation. And what you're seeing today is companies using mobility in a big way. You can access any content from anywhere you want. We are seeing a lot of adoption of cloud, enterprise applications going to the cloud. And the reason, of course, being that one is the COVID situation, which is making us work from home, and the need for us to connect to our enterprise app from wherever we are, but even to connect to client environments, you're using cloud infrastructure for that. The need for digital transformation, of course, one big reason being that you want to improve customer experience, which is a key differentiator today when you, irrespective of what industry that you talk about. The need to drive cost and operational efficiencies. So digital transformation today is non-negotiable. Companies would have no choice but to adopt if they really have to survive and thrive in today's environment. And it is transforming with confidence and speed and not haste, as I mentioned here, because you need to have initiatives which can move quickly, but obviously not in haste, not at the cost of compromising on things like cybersecurity. And I think today what we are seeing and what we are witnessing is that because of a lot more connected devices connecting to the internet, a lot of data being generated, the cyber attack surface has grown, a lot more threats have emerged, and hence cyber risk becomes very complex, very expensive, and yet the innovation must continue, right? Now, given that cyber risk is significant today, and the need for the board, for the CEOs to get involved, and when you talk specifically about IoT, there is a framework in terms of how do you secure the IoT, right? So I think the first and foremost step is one needs to assess the risk. What is the risk to the business in case your network gets compromised, in case you have devices on the field, your manufacturing company has got machinery, has got connected products on the field. What happens if they get compromised, right? So you need to assess the risk. What's the damage that it will cost in case there's a compromise, if someone hacks into your system? The need to secure information and devices, right? So earlier it was just securing your infrastructure in your data center environment, or maybe working with the cloud provider to secure your applications and all that stuff which is residing on the cloud. But with IoT, you have a lot of devices now on the network, right? Non-IT devices. Could be machines, it could be trucks, vehicles, cars, what have you. Thirdly, the need to align IoT strategy and security, right? So that's so important, because the need to ensure that there is one consistent strategy both for IT and OT, operational technology, which is your business, whatever industry that you are in, right? So you need to have one consistent policy. And finally, you need to identify what are the legal and regulatory issues, especially when it comes to data. Each country have got their own regulations when it comes to where data has to reside. How do you protect it? How do you ensure privacy? Of course, you all know about GDPR, which is prevalent in Europe. In India, Parliament is looking at the Personal Data Protection Bill, which is currently under review, right? So countries have taken steps to make sure that, how do you ensure your data gets protected? How are users ensured that your data doesn't get misused? Now, the other thing is, when you talk about cybersecurity, the CEOs, the typical questions which they should be asking is, firstly, is the board involved in cybersecurity? Because in case you have a situation where your security is compromised, and if that is known to the markets, if it's known to the external environment, then of course the damage it does to your reputation and your image is significant, right? It can impact your revenues and profitability in the near to short term, right? So then things like, when did the board review the last risk assessment? Because this is something which is a continuous process. What makes you a target for attacks? I think that is so important, right? Whatever business that you're in. And today, unfortunately, even the small and medium businesses are also very, very badly affected. They are also being threatened. They are also being attacked. Fourthly, what data is leaving your company and how is it secured, right? Because we are living in an ecosystem where it's just not you and your employees and your own offices, because today the ecosystem is much larger. You're connecting to your customers. You're connecting to partners. So the ecosystem is much more broader now. And finally, however, I provided security option, all the tools, resources that they need to help a security, to prevent a security breach, right? So these are typical questions that CEOs should be asking cybersecurity. Now, very quickly, I'm going to share with you some trends or something which happened last year. There's this company called Subex, which is very strong in the telecom space. They do a lot of solutions for analytics, fraud management, and all that. And they did a study last year on the state of IoT security in India. And I'm going to very quickly share some findings here. So when they did the study over a 3-month period, and they had their honeypot network set up to make sure that they're able to capture data. They had data from other sources, and they use a lot of AI and machine learning as well to analyze all the humongous amount of data that they gathered. And what was interesting is that when they looked at India, the country, that Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore were the most attacked cities. This was last year. And what also was interesting is that there was a huge increase in modular malware driven attacks. And modular malware, as you would know, is like a hacker ingesting malware at different stages into your environment, which is very, very dangerous, right? So, and once a malware is ingested, at times companies may not even know it. And then when you have malware ingested at multiple stages, the damage can be huge. And what also came out of the study was that smart city projects, banking and transportation were the sectors which are most affected during that 3-month period when they did the study, and the malware variants were more, and also the countries of origin of cyber attacks were countries like Czech, Poland, and Slovenia, which means that if you just look at India, we really don't have too much of economic relationships with countries like Czech and Poland and Slovenia, very, very minimal. But what these hackers did is that they were able to use IP spoofing to make it appear as though the origination of attacks was from these countries, whereas the actual attacks could have been maybe from a China or a Pakistan or someone who's really a threat to us, right? Now, just continuing on the trends that we saw last year, the worrying thing is that the malware persistence. What was noticed is that the hackers were willing to wait. They were not, impatient. They were very patient, and they were willing to wait till they were able to create more impact. So the average malware persistence was greater than 90 days, and a lot of the attacks were very sophisticated, and the persistence, as they said, more than 90 days, and very high grade attacks. Right? And smart cities, financial service, and transportation accounted for more than 50% of the cyber attacks. There were other sectors also which were affected, like manufacturing and healthcare to a certain extent. But these are the 3 sectors which were very, very badly impacted last year. And I'm not surprised to see financial services in this list, because even now we see a lot of cyber attacks taking place on financial services. Now, fast forwarding to 2020, and the same Subex, they did a study in the first quarter. And they came up with these findings. They found that, and this is known, these coronavirus-themed phishing attacks were on the rise. I think we have seen that. All of us have seen those kind of mails. And obviously, organizations have taken steps to make sure that employees are made aware and not to click on those phishing links. Interestingly, number of attacks on China, significant. Also, what we've seen is that the leakages in the dark web have increased like 7%. So I think, and almost every other day I keep hearing and seeing news about the fact that a lot of data is now being sold in dark web, and this is just increasing. And we've also seen that apart from banks and enterprises, healthcare institutions have also been targeted. And this is again not a surprise, because with a lot of healthcare institutions coming to the picture of patients and all, the healthcare institutions which normally are not very secure from a cyber standpoint, because their investment in IT and technology compared to the other sectors is not as much, and they have been attacked a lot. So these are findings that from the report from Subex. And what is their forecast for the coming quarter? The COVID-19 attacks will definitely continue. So all of us must be on our guard as individuals and as companies. Interestingly, they said that apart from financial services, healthcare, and smart cities, retail also was going to be on the list of the hacker targets. And I think a lot of online commerce has happened in the last 3 months, and this will continue because customer buying behavior has changed, our habits have changed. We prefer to sit in the comfort of our homes and shop. So there's definitely the threat that retail networks might even get targeted even more compared to earlier. And also what is going to be very critical is once the lockdown eases and once people start getting back to offices and once they connect back to the network in the office, those devices which have been infected will lead to a lot more security issues. So I think a lot of effort that is needed on part of security and network administrators in the office to make sure that they're able to isolate those kind of infected devices. Government agencies will also be on high alert. So that's per the prediction. A lot of enterprises will experience DDoS attacks. So these are some things which we'll have to look very carefully in the next quarter. Now, given all these threats, given that the threat is increasing day by day, what's the solution? How do you address all these cyber threats? How do you go one step ahead of the hacker, right? And I'm going to share with you an IoT perspective. How do you ensure end-to-end security for IoT, right? And we adopt what is called as a multi-layered approach to security. And when you just look at Internet of Things, the first thing is that you're going to connect an IoT device to an asset, a physical asset, right? That asset could be a machine, it could be a car, it could be a consumer appliance, it could be any non-IT device, right? So you're taking an IoT device with the required sensors in it, which has the connectivity module connecting to an asset. So the IoT device is the one which really is the weak link in the chain. And I'm going to spend a little more time in terms of how do you secure an IoT endpoint, right? So the first thing is you got to secure the IoT endpoint, which is connected to a physical asset. And these endpoints come in different processing power. Some don't even have an operating system. Some have an operating system, right? So the processing power varies depending on the use case. Secondly, the device generates data, and the data is going through a network. And the network could be a cellular network, it could be Wi-Fi, it could be a wired network, it could be satellite network, right? So you got to secure the data that is going through the network. You need to secure the network. So second thing is securing network. Third thing is the data is eventually going and residing on a cloud platform, right? Or it could be on your own enterprise, in your own environment. So you got to secure the workloads and applications on your own environment or on the cloud. And then eventually the need is to detect the threats and respond to it, right? So it's just not enough to prevent, but you got to, and you, in case you're compromised, you got to respond very quickly, and you need to have a very strong strategy and governance framework, right? Your policies, your governance of the policies, all that has to be very, very strong, right? So essentially, when you talk about IoT security, securing endpoint, securing connectivity, and securing the data and applications. Then let's look at the endpoint, the IoT endpoint, which is the IoT device which connects to an asset, right? So, and these, as I mentioned, the IoT device which has the sensors, which has the network module, it could be a cellular module, it could be a Wi-Fi module, whatever. Many of them don't have an operating system. Some of them have, some don't. Very little processing power, right? And many devices, unfortunately, they don't even have a security processor. Now we are seeing a lot of the device manufacturers realizing the need to build hardware-based security devices. So adding a security chip or what is called as the trusted platform module on the device, right? So when you have an endpoint, the need is to make sure that when it connects to the network, it is able to do bidirectional authentication, where the device has to authenticate itself to the network and the network has to authenticate itself to the device. That's one very important thing. You find companies or device manufacturers using embedded SIMs or eSIMs, where you take a SIM and you solder it on the device so that somebody cannot just remove the SIM like that, right? So we are seeing a lot more use of embedded SIMs. Your SIM has identity and access management to access all the apps, and you're kind of creating an trusted execution environment to make sure that you're able to secure all the systems within the device, because the device has got a microcontroller, it's got a processor and all this stuff. And then what you also do is you can also use today, if you just look at our smartphones, which is also like an IoT device because we have a lot of sensors in it. You use a lot of enterprise mobile management platforms for it, right? For example, you could use an IBM MAS 360, you could use a mobile endpoint management solution. Now we're talking about IoT devices on the ground, which are on the field. And the need is also to make sure that whenever there are what is called firmware over the air or software updates that needs to be done, firmware and software over the air updates, You can use the cellular network to do that rather than have someone physically having to connect to the device and do changes on the firmware and the software. So today you can do over-the-air updates if you want to change firmware and software. Now, we as a company, when we actually put together solutions for any customer, the device that we use for a use case, and let's assume that it's a telematics device which is connected to the car. Um, uh, the need is to make sure that the device is properly tested and certified. And I think this is something which I want to elaborate on. The need is to make sure that the device is certified. And there are various bodies which do certification of devices. So in India, we have National Trust Center, which does certification. While it is not mandatory today to have an IoT device certified, it is strongly recommended to do that. And this, when you do the device testing and certification, it goes through a number of tests. Okay, and there are various categories. So I've given you one particular category where you test the service, terms of service, the privacy policy, the password management, the authentication test, patch management, etc. So this is one category where you do basic security safeguards. Then you can go to the second category where you can do a stronger end-to-end security, right? I'm not going to go through all the details, but like things like a secure boot to make sure that when it is booting up, it is booting from a a trusted firmware or a software. Threat management, threat monitoring, IoT device identity, all that stuff. Multi-factor authentication, very, very important, like how you do your transactions today on banking through multi-factor authentication, where you use password as well as OTP. Similarly, you can have a similar thing for IoT. And the third category is you do things like a digital signature generation, encryption of data, tamper evidence, and all that stuff. So it's very, very important that from an IoT standpoint, when you build the device, when you test it, it has to be certified. And the certification also comes at a cost. But I think cost should not be the concern here, given that if the IoT device is compromised, then it can really create havoc, because the IoT device can then be used as a gateway to get into the network, and it can really create a lot of damage, right? So it's very, very important that the device has to be certified. And we as a company have taken that decision that any device that we use has to be a certified device. The module inside has to be certified, and the overall device has to be certified. Now, having talked about the IoT device, now I'm moving to connectivity. So data is going through a network, right? So you need to make sure that the data which is going through the network is also secure. And there are various means by which you can do that. For example, data which is going from an IoT device to a cloud can be going through a VPN. You could have private APNs, access point names, which is very similar to a VPN. All of us are using VPNs to connect to our corporate network. So in the IoT world, when you're using cellular, private APN is an equivalent to a VPN. Okay, and then you could use connectivity management platforms to manage that connectivity. So security of the network is so important, and there are various ways by which you can do that using, as I mentioned, VPN, APNs. You can have closed user groups, etc. Now, the next thing is the data and application security, right? So once the data comes and resides on a public cloud, it could be on your own environment. The need is to make sure that you secure all the data, you secure all the applications, right? And there are various ways by which you can do that, right? So you could have, network-based firewall, which perhaps some of you would have heard of. Normally, you have a premise-based firewall where you have the firewall residing on an existing customer environment, and then you make sure that the firewall does all the required functionality of monitoring all the traffic, inspecting everything, and then allowing it to go into the DMZs internally. But what if you have the firewall on the cloud, so that you can do all the scrubbing, do all the analysis, and figure out which traffic has to be passed and which should be discarded. And so the network-based firewall is a good solution. You could have intrusion detection on the cloud. Of course, you need to do data vulnerability scanning. A lot of data tools around that, data loss prevention. So I think there are enough and more tools that are available today to secure all your data and applications which are residing on the cloud today. Now, let me move to industrial assets. Now, let's look at manufacturing, because manufacturing today, or even utilities, power companies, manufacturing companies, they have their industrial assets now connected to the internet, and operational technology infrastructure attacks have been increasing. OT, as they call it, the operational technology. And I wanted to give you some examples here of how in the past, we have seen how cyber attacks have impacted countries and enterprises. So you would have heard of the Stuxnet attack, which disrupted the Iran nuclear program. The New York dam floodgates were compromised in 2013. A very large shipping liner, I can't name the company here, but they were hit by a malware 2017, and they had a $250 million loss because of that. Again, there's a large global aluminum producer who was shut down by ransomware last year. And just a few weeks back, a very large automotive OEM, a well-known automotive OEM, they were hit by a ransomware attack, right? So the threats are only increasing, and as more and more companies adopt digital, they get more of their devices connected to the internet, the threats will only increase more. So how do you protect your OT assets, your operational technology assets, right? I think as you see from the picture here, on one side you have all your OT side, which is your things. It could be a car, it could be an airplane, it could be a machine, anything on the OT side, and then you're connecting the data to the cloud and your applications there. And of course, you're allowing certain vendors to connect to the cloud through third-party access. So how do you ensure that you're able to secure all the data which is being generated by all your OT assets? You could use an IoT gateway, so it's that circle which is there in between the cloud and the assets. So you could have an IoT gateway which will do all the stuff, so it can monitor all the traffic which is going through that through the gateway. It will ensure that the policy framework that is prepared is adhered to. So the policies that you set up in terms of security, all that, making sure that governance around that is very strong. And the very, very important thing which I want to share with you is that the companies which have a strategy for OT, for that matter IT, if you have a strategy for IT, if you have a particular security policy for IT, you cannot have the same, you cannot have a different policy, for OT. You cannot have two different policies, one for the OT environment and one for the information technology environment. It has to be one consistent policy, because all your industrial assets are all now part of your overall ecosystem or a part of your network. So you got to have one comprehensive policy that will govern all your assets. And how do you ensure that you govern that policy? You need a good IT gateway. You need to manage the visibility and control of all your environments, right? And so this is a potential solution for industrial IoT security. Now, in conclusion, I just wanted to share that IT security and OT security is something which cannot be decided by the chief information and security officers. This is something which is a boardroom agenda. It's something which the CEOs would have to discuss in the boardroom, because I think there are enough examples where companies who've been compromised, I think they've been badly hit from a reputation perspective, from an image standpoint, and it took a while for companies to get their customers build that trust. Because if I know that if I'm having a relationship with an existing partner or a vendor, and if I know that they have been compromised, obviously the trust for me comes down, right? I'll have second thoughts whether I should engage with them or not. What in case with an e-commerce platform, if they've been compromised, I don't want to take the risk of again going and transacting on that platform, right? So trust is so important. So I think that's why it's very, very important that this is addressed at a very, very senior level within an organization. Secondly, the defense in depth or the multi-layered approach, that's the only way forward. You've got to you've got to address security at every layer. As I mentioned, the device layer from an IoT standpoint, the network, as well as these data and applications. And the security by design principle, because security has to be architected right from the beginning, from the design itself. It cannot be bolted on. And here I just wanted to draw your attention to, just about 2 years back, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, which is the telecom regulator, when they were actually framing the IoT policy for India, and when they were talking about the IoT devices, where they have to be made, and how are they going to be certified and all this stuff, they made it very clear that the devices have to adopt what is called security by design principle. It's still a recommendation. It's not yet converted into policy yet. It's still being looked at. But in case it becomes a firm policy, I think it's fantastic, because every device manufacturer, because the IoT device manufacturers, they want to get the cost of the device low. So at times security gets compromised. But once you have security by design principle, then they have no choice but to make sure that they add the required checks and balances That could be hardware-based, software-based, but just make sure that the device is secure. And last point which I want to make is that security just cannot be looked at as an extra cost, and because it would need investment and resources. This is something which companies would have to make sure that they spend that required investment on security, be it tools and resources, be it people, be it working with partners. But this is something that they just cannot compromise on, because when breaches happen, it can definitely have significant consequences. So with that, I'm done with my presentation and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sunil. That was a very informative session. I think we already have a couple of questions from the audience. I'm going to ask you the first question. You can hear me, right?
Yes, I can.
Okay. What exactly is fog computing?
So fog computing is they use the word called edge. So today, if you have an asset in your environment, let's assume it's a machine, and it's generating data, right? And what you do is you send that data to the cloud, right? So you use a network and you send data to the cloud, right? And then the data resides in the cloud, and then you do your analysis and all that, and then you take decisions based on the data that you analyze, right? Now, in the case of fog computing, what happens is you have the processing of all the data closer to where the asset is. So it's basically an edge solution. It's much closer to where it is. It's not on the cloud. It's much closer to where it is. So you avoid sending the data through a network. It is actually within your own environment, right? So okay. It's called an edge device. So it's called that's why it's called fog. It's not the cloud. It's much closer to where the place from where the data is getting generated.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. So, okay, next one. What type of analysis is done at the gateway?
Okay, I just want a little more clarity on that. The IoT gateway, you're talking about
reference to you're talking about fog computing and being a gateway in the middle between the cloud and the IoT device. So the participant has asked what...
Okay. Same person has asked the question, is it?
Yes. What type of analysis is done at the gateway?
So now what's happening is at the gateway, and see, for example, let's assume it's a particular blast furnace in a manufacturing environment. Again, taking example of manufacturing here, and you're getting a lot of temperature data from the furnace. The data, as I mentioned earlier, can go to the cloud through a network, but now you're going to use a gateway or an edge device on the environment itself. So when you have data which is coming to an edge gateway, which is closer to where the asset is, you're able to respond much faster, because in case you have a situation where the temperature goes up significantly and you need to take an action, right? So because it's just not getting data, right? You got to take a decision. You got to close that control system loop, right? If the temperature of that furnace goes up, I need to quickly switch it off, or I need to make sure that there's enough coolant or something available to bring the temperature down, right? So you need to take corrective action. When you have edge solution, you're able to respond much faster because your latency is much lower. You're not traversing through the network. So you're able to respond much faster. So the edge gateway, to answer the question, it has to have enough computing power. It has to have enough processing power. It has to have enough storage, because you're going to get a lot of data onto that. And we are also hearing a concept of AI on the edge now. So the edge AI is actually going to be residing on the gateway. Where you could actually predict an outcome, right? So it's early days, but we're going to see perhaps a trend where it's going to be a hybrid approach. There would be some edge solutions, and there could also be data going to the cloud. So it could be a mix of both that are going to be used.
Okay, thank you for that very clear answer. So next question. Now, one of the biggest selling or biggest appeals for IoT when it comes to the manufacturers and consumers is that you can get all of this novelty for very cheap. So let me give you an example. I've come across one device. It's a salt shaker. It's an IoT-enabled salt shaker. It's similar to what you mentioned about your fish tank. Now, these are very low-cost devices, very low processing power, and they have the novelty of some internet-connected features. Now, where is the question coming in about adding a security chip over there? Because most of them are just going to think about very low processing devices such as this. So how do you go about securing such devices?
Yeah, so this is a big challenge, Aditya, because many manufacturers, they really want to get the cost of that really down so that they can make it affordable for consumers, right? And this is that challenge, right? So the moment you add security to that, which means that it could be a chip that you're adding, a security processor that you could add, the cost would go up for that, because those chips don't come cheap, right? So I think what you'll have to do is some very basic security hygiene, like simple things like password. Making sure that you have a very robust password. It shouldn't be something which can easily be deciphered. Frequently changing your password. That is one. Then also you could perhaps look at, I don't know whether it's possible, like today on your cell phone you could use VPN to send data, right? You can have a VPN app on your phone and you can still use a VPN, so it's a little more secure, right? So that is also perhaps a possibility where you could use like an APN, like how you have VPN for your laptops. You could use what is called an access point name, which is equivalent of a VPN but on a cellular network. So you could have that, right? And then you can discard URLs, which are malicious, so you can do a constant check in terms of what sites those are connected to. So you have to use a lot of the combination of this to make sure that you're able to secure that without having to incur too much of cost in adding a security chip and all that. Because once a device is there without a chip, and then you got to bolt on security, it's possible, but then there's an extra cost for that.
Okay, thank you for that. We have another question. What kind of AI approach can be used to detect attacks in IoT?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And see, the whole premise is, today you react whenever an incident occurs, right? A particular network gets compromised, and then you react, and then you detect it, and you then have to respond to it, right? Now, what if you're able to predict, right? So the whole premise changes to predictive alerting, right? You got to predict when it's going to happen. And what is AI? AI is at the end of the day predicting an outcome, right? Because you are building a machine learning model, you're getting all the data, analyzing it, you're doing correlation with data from multiple sources, and then your model gets even more better. And then at some point in time, you're able to predict when something might happen. And I can give you the example of what we do within AT&T. See, on an average, we process about 296 petabytes of traffic per day. 296 petabytes. It's humongous amount of data going. And what we do is we have created a data lake where we take data going on the internet. If you just look at the internet, almost 40% of the traffic goes on our network. Then we take data coming from other third-party sources. We take data coming from our clients. And then what we have done is we have analyzed all this data. And then there we are using our AI and machine learning to understand what are the trends, what are the patterns, what is happening. And after seeing all that, we're able to predict that there could be a threat. And then once we know that, then we can tell a customer that, hey, I see a potential threat, and this is what you can perhaps take to mitigate that threat. So AI and machine learning, we're going to see a lot more of that being used for predictive alerting, when you can predict when an attack might when an attack might happen. So watch out for that. I think we'll see a lot more organizations deploy AI for cybersecurity going forward. And I think there are enough drivers for that, Aditya, because if you just look at it, the amount of the cost for sending data to cloud, the connectivity cost has come down significantly. Devices cost are getting lower, sensor costs are getting lower, and the cost of cloud is also lower, Aditya, because see, Amazon Web Services, they do a price revision almost 19 times a year. So your cost of compute and cloud comes down significantly, and it might even come down even further. So with the cost of computing and storage coming down year on year, there's enough driver now to push more of the data to the cloud. And then when you do that, then obviously you could run your AI and machine learning on all that stuff, and you're able to predict an outcome and then predict a threat.
Okay, thank you. That was a very in-depth answer, I would say. So, okay, another question. You were talking about now over-the-air updates when it comes to vehicles. Now, a lot of companies in India also, there's a company called Ather, then a lot of Hyundai, Kia, they're all implementing some sort of internet connectivity to all of the cars, and they have features like over-the-air updates as well. Now, how safe are these platforms and communication protocols when you start talking about, at least for automobiles?
See, I would say it's very safe, because if you just look at automobiles, and this is something which an industry where AT&T is very strong, and because a lot of the connected cars today use AT&T cellular solution, and that is a SIM card which goes into the device, the telematics device. And if you just look at the deployment of connected cars, I would say 99.9% of them uses cellular network, which is following GSMA standards, right? And if you just look at GSM, the cellular standard, they have evolved over many, many years, so very, very mature. And they have done a lot of work in making sure that there is the right governance, right standards that are involved in the security. So any data which is going to cellular, I would say is far, far more secure as compared to any other means. So Wi-Fi has its own challenges from a security standpoint. There could be satellite is very unlikely that you can compromise the satellite network, but cellular is very reliable, and because the standard itself is so strong and because it's evolved over so many years. So one is that, and plus the other things which I talked about, right, where you could do a APN through internet. You could even have an IPsec tunnel that can be set up through the cellular network. So the device, the telematics device, in fact, we have an implementation where the device has got a SIM in it, which is an encrypted SIM. So the data is anyway getting encrypted, going right through the network, and encrypted data then goes on an IPsec platform. So IPsec tunnel going through the internet, right? So I would say that today you shouldn't have any fear for connected cars, because it's very rare that somebody can just compromise and connect into that connected car to cellular. If it does happen, I mean, not that it cannot happen, but the chances of it happening are very low if you have the right security, the right checks and balances in place, making sure that you have a telematic. Again, bringing in the point of certification, because you got to have the telematic device which is certified. And today in India, you got to follow what is called AS 140 standard. If you follow AS 140 standard, they do a lot of tests, both from a testing security perspective to make sure that the device is certified and can be deployed in a connected car.
Okay. Thank you for that very in-depth answer and reassuring all of us about the security of connected cars. So any other questions from the audience? Okay, so I don't think the audience have any more questions. Actually, no, there is one more. So when you start talking about IoT devices, let's talk about for agriculture purposes. So you have like sensors that probably the water levels in the soil and all of that. Very small processing power units. So someone had mentioned using intrusion detection systems and IPS systems. You can't exactly put those devices behind an IPS and IDS. They are external devices. How do you go about securing them?
Yeah, so intrusion detection and IPS are all on the cloud. So that is to secure your data and application to the cloud. When we talk about agriculture implements, be it sensors on the soil and all that. So see, the architecture, the architecture in if you just look at agriculture, typically what they do is in a field, if they're using sensors to measure water levels, those sensors are connected to a gateway through a wired network. Most often than not, that's the architecture. You have a wired network which connects to the gateway. So it's very unlikely that you can compromise that wired network, because that's unless somebody is able to. It's very unlikely that it's like cutting a fiber and trying to get into it, right? Nobody can do that, right? If you have a broadband network at home, a fiber, how can one compromise it? You have to break that fiber. If the fiber breaks, it's gone, right? Similarly, in agriculture field, you have sensors connected to the gateway through a wired network, and the gateway is the one which has the module, and that is connected to the cellular network. And if you're able to secure that gateway properly with the security chip and make sure that it has all the required testing done, things like secure boot, right firmware, regular updates, patch updates, all that if you do, then it's very unlikely that you can have your sensors compromised, because very unlikely that might happen. Yeah.
Thank you. We have one more question. Any estimated timeline about IoT standards coming into mainstream completion?
The various bodies, different standards. See, I need to understand when you're talking about standards, was it from a device standpoint? Because each one follows certain protocols. There are different ways by which data can be sent from an IoT device to the cloud. There are different types of communication protocols, like MQTT is one, lightweight MQM. So there are a lot of these. So this is an ongoing thing, Aditya. So this will evolve, right? So and that's a big problem today, this fragmentation of IoT devices. I think this is something which is evolving. I think many people are coming together, and I think there are enough alliances in place. Like we are part of a cybersecurity alliance with Palo Alto Networks, Nokia, Qualcomm, making sure that all of us comply with one common set of standards. So like how we have the cybersecurity alliance with these partners, there are others also doing that. And at the end of the day, we all have to partner together to make sure that that seamless interoperability, whether your device is sending data to cloud, what device, what platform, what module, etc. So it's all something which is work in progress right now.
Okay, thank you. I was going to ask another question, but you already answered that. I was going to ask what makes it so complicated, but you already answered by talking about the various communication protocols that exist for different IoT devices, that itself adds to the complexity of it. So,
absolutely. That's true. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Sunil. This was very informative. You gave us a lot of information even when you started talking about the question and answers. It was very in-depth and technical. You gave us standards and examples. And now we are all much more informed about the steps that some organizations, when you start talking about certification and standards and protocols, we are very, very well informed now. Thank you so much, Sunil.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me for this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sunil.